So I'm here to speak about hardware and what is the role of hardware in cybersecurity. I won't be doing this as an expert because I'm not, but as an observer of what has been happening across the past 30 years, where hardware has been disappearing in a way, even if it has never been that important. You probably remember the guy on the left. You probably remember him being the author of that famous sentence about software being everywhere, software being eating the world, driving the world. Yet hardware is still in the background, shaping what is going on. The guy in the middle is probably somebody you don't know. Anybody who knows him, raise your hand. Okay, this guy is named Frank Frankowski. He was the initiator of one of the largest open source hardware projects ever deployed in the world. That is called Open Compute. Open Compute is the way Facebook has totally open sourced the hardware design of its own data centers, allowing them to reach several milestones, including a very, very low power efficiency unit. The guy on the right is a good friend of mine who's a French evangelist and advocate of open compute. I won't get back to him on this presentation because we're short on time, but he's the guy who deserves really to be known. How many of you have read the book in the left? Come on. Ghost Fleet doesn't echo anything. It's a very, very impressive thriller that foresees a major conflict between China and the US, and where the US Navy realizes that most of the systems they use on their battleships are powered by microprocessors that they do not master the design of, which were all coming from China, and that have all been compromised. And this is how the story starts. More recently, there was this cover of The Economist that surfaced in 2018. But it took 2 more years to realize, actually, that Taiwan was much closer to mainland China than ever expected, and that Taiwan was really concentrating most of the production of chips in the world. At least for my French government, it was, I shouldn't say an epiphany, but it was a very, very harsh discovery of something that had been around for decades. So hardware is at the very heart of every of the appliances, every of the systems that we use, and cannot be disconnected from software issues when it comes to cybersecurity. And it started very early. I don't know if you remember that experiment that was conducted back, I mean, it was 2015, it means 7 years ago. And 7 years ago, Miller and Valasek demonstrated that you could hack a car in a very strange manner, and you could force the car actually behave differently than what it was how it was expected. But thank you for the applause. Thank you for the applause. And what was interesting in this hack is that it also opened the door to other smaller, more mundane devices to be hacked as experiments. Maybe some of you remember coffee machines being hacked. That was an experiment that was also interesting because it started to reveal that hardware is fragile, hardware is involved through I/O. And each time you need to interact with the system, you have an issue with the I/O subsystems that allow commands that allow information to flow back and forth between the device and the network, or the device and external devices. But actually, when you look deeper, it shows that everything in IT is about I/O. And I had a conversation recently with the guy I showed you on the right in the picture, Jean-Marie Verdun. Jean-Marie is now the #2 of HP Server's business engineering. And HP has decided a few months ago to go carbon neutral on all of their servers by 2030, which is a huge effort. When you want to go carbon neutral, you need to make sure that your servers are no longer shredded. Because at its end of life, a server is just shredded, and then you separate metal from the rest, from epoxy, using huge acid tanks. And then the rest, which is non-recyclable, is sent far away to be burnt in open air. If you want to start to modularize your server design, you want to look at your subsystems that still can be reused in other servers or in other configurations. And therefore, you need to envision modular architectures. And the interesting part is here. When you do a modular architecture, it means that you need to remove a subsystem from an obsolete server so that you can reuse it in another one. That has two consequences. The first one is that you take a small part that was usually software deeply wired into hardware. Let's think of the BMC subsystem for power management. All of a sudden, as you need to repurpose it for other goals, you will have to redesign your software stack and use a Linux subsystem that you can reprogram when you switch the board from one server to another. And all of a sudden, you start to have vulnerabilities in systems, in subsystems, that you thought would be immune because they were always doing the same thing for which they were programmed. So again, that example shows that the more we will face reuse, the more we will face carbon neutrality, the more we will expose subsystems to hacking. And when we talk about edge computing, we should also remember that edge computing is actually multiplying Moore's law by hundreds of millions of devices that get replaced very, very quickly. The first device that enjoys Moore's law and that is replaced too quickly is this. You all have one in your pocket. And that is why at the edge of the network nowadays, the estimates show that the total computing power at the edge is now by far exceeding the computing power that is in the core systems, in the core networks. And that means that each time you speak about edge computing, you are speaking about millions, if not hundreds of millions of devices that can all be made vulnerable at some point. And again, this will be at the intersection between low-level hardware and software management systems that you will find those new vulnerabilities that nobody is thinking of because they are only embedded by design. And after that, they are not that remotely or regularly observed or watched after than all the other ones. And independently of whether the metaverse is a promise, a hype, or a failure or whatever, you have these millions of devices that are capable of executing more and more complex tasks, including showing false, wrong information to the viewer. We also have that huge issue about auditability, which means that you will need to be able to dive in very, very low to be able to make sure that the subsystems that you are using can be audited. And this is where, again, open sourcing hardware is probably one of the possible answers. Think of RISC-V processor architectures, but probably for other subsystems. And now we have a question. If we can hack hardware devices in the real world, what does it mean when it comes to the digital twins of those hardware devices, especially in massively distributed video games? As soon as you start trading objects in the digital version, you will be starting trading virtual capacities of what are supposed to be the digital twins of hardware. And again, the question is, how would we envision games, or how would we envision very large distributed systems where the hardware representation, the digital representation, of hardware can be hacked? At what level do you hack? This is a whole new field of investigation. And to be able to do that, and this is the 2 minutes of advertising, because I'm running, again, a computer engineering school in France. This is where your only limit is talent, and will rely on your ability to train and to onboard students as early as possible, because these will be the girls and the guys capable of anticipating what is ahead of us and starting to fix it with methods, approaches, mindsets that we don't, and I include myself in this audience, that we don't have. So my message would be, again, to start working much closer with the universities, with the engineering schools, even abroad, which means also with EPITA, when it comes to raising cybersecurity awareness and tapping into cybersecurity actual talent. Because again, in cybersecurity as well as in imaging and in AI, we have top-notch students during their 2 last years in the school who are ready to help you tackle these challenges. So for those who among the audience is speaking French? Okay, you might be interested with that book. And if we have a few minutes, I will be happy to answer 1 or 2 questions. Thank you so much.